discuss as we're going today, or invite other people to present their materials if they wish to, particularly members. This is open to the public, but it's only the members that can participate. So you may have attended sort of fireside chats or webinars like this in the past, but I assure you this is going to be somewhat unique. I'm happy to welcome Chris Smithmeyer, who I've got to know over the last few months through the GBA. While we had a brief chat about maybe the possibility of how interesting this conversation could be, it's mainly because we've had several interesting conversations ourselves, but I haven't pre-agreed any softball questions for him. And we'll take the conversation where it goes. So I'm sure it's going to be interesting on that basis. And I'll leave some time at the end for the audience to ask questions as well. So without further ado, let me introduce Chris. Chris, if you can give a brief introduction for yourself, and then we can kick off the webinar.
Okay. Hi, my name is Chris Smithmeyer. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Black Wallet Limited. We are a stablecoin 2.0 ecosystem management company. We are based off of a basket of goods with a cyclic burn mechanism, all kinds of fun technical stuff. If you come down to future money and governance of the law, I can definitely walk you through all that. I'm also the author of several books, and a couple of the really exciting things that I've got to author outside of books and articles these last couple weeks was Gerard and I just finished the tokenomics supplement for the BMM, which has just went through public commentary, and it was really exciting getting that cleaned up, having some of the top minds in the world talk about this. And then we also, at the Internet Governance Forum on Monday morning, Gerard introduced the model law on cryptocurrencies and digital assets, which we are going to be opening for commentary now, but we're really starting to push it at the conference in 2 weeks and really get the voices out there for people that the Wild West era of cryptocurrency and blockchain is starting to come to an end. Business is starting to move in, institutions are starting to accept it. And there are two options in the world: either governments with people that are still learning what cryptocurrency and blockchains are going to pass laws that have some problems and they have to be adapted through years and years of rigorous litigation, or we can work together as industry leaders, as people in the government, as people that are using cryptocurrency and developing cryptocurrencies to bring a law to the table that nations around the world can use so that we can have business surety around the world. And we're hoping that that's going to be a big thing. So if you have time to comment on the new law, please comment on it. And if you love it, let us know. If you hate it, call the White House switchboard and be like, we don't like Cheetos or something like that. But no, if you don't like it, let us know what you don't like about it. But yeah, we're really interested in having some comments on that. So that's kind of me. If you want to get to know me, come to the conference.
All right. I'll just clarify for the audience that the BMM is the blockchain maturity model, which was built by a working group, standards and certification group, over 2 years or so that you can assess blockchain solutions on 5 different layers across 11 different elements. And then what Chris mentioned was the various working groups may have supplements. So there's supplemental requirements if you're in specific industries or use cases. And the supplements that exist right now are banking and finance, voting, gaming, healthcare, identity, and, as Chris just said, tokenization. So Chris, how did you get into crypto, blockchain, tokenization? What was your entry point?
Well, back in about 2017, a long time ago, pre-COVID times, I'm a game reviewer for a national publication, and my boss called and said, "Hey, we have this guy that created a political cryptocurrency." And pardon my language, she said, "Do you know anything about that shit so that we can possibly interview him to promote his product?" I'm like, "Okay, I'll talk to him about it, see what it is." And I got to talking to him about it. Now, I came into blockchain as a skeptic because I remember back in the old days whenever we built botnets off of the same white paper that blockchain was developed. And it was a kind of interesting conversation because I saw the illegal side of what was happening with the botnets. And this new unregulated industry was kind of interesting for me because I'm a lawyer by trade and everything like that. So as I started to learn more about it, and as I started digging through what this guy was building, I'm like, hey, there's some stuff here. This might be an interesting way that he's going about it, a very niche market. And we got into the idea of developing a token to help people in Africa. This was just a great idea, an academic exercise. And then about a couple months later, we came back and we said, hey, we have something a little bit more than that. So rather than just put a coin out when we didn't know what we were doing and just throwing everything on the market, we worked for 2 years building out the business structure, learning about the material, learning about everything we could, going to every online conference we could afford or that we could that was free to learn about it. And eventually it got to the point that I started writing papers on it, and then eventually writing books on it. And now I'm speaking around the world on the topic and bringing things in. And also our product is launched with Kira's coin is now available for purchase. But we did bring it to the market, and we started looking at where you could find great blockchain solutions, great blockchain projects. And then I met this gentleman named Gerard Dache, or Gerard Dache, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name right, Gerard. And he said, you should come to this conference in DC. And I said, well, I can't make it down. I'm sick. I had COVID at the time of the first one that I heard about. And I went, and it was the most amazing conference of any of the ones that I'd been to or listened to. And this got me introduced to people like Paul, to people like Ross and Bob. And it really brought me into the group. And eventually we joined. And now we made 100,000 unit donation this year to the organization to bring this group, this essence, to the global blockchain community, because it's what's needed. We need people that are working and talking and not just arguing, because some of these conferences is just people fighting back and forth. The GBA meetings, yeah, we have our disagreements and stuff, but people are working together and working to get past those disagreements, not just trying to shill their own product. They're really working to push the industry forward. And that's how I got started and kind of my history with blockchain.
So in simple terms, I'm probably got a well-informed audience here, but why is blockchain, why is tokenization important? What is the benefit?
One of the big things, and the reason why we jumped on tokenization as soon as it became like a thing, like taking regular assets and converting them, is the number one cause of stress in the economic world is corruption. And the number one reason for corruption is because of lack of transparency and lack of auditing ability. And what that helps us with, and the tokenization specifically, is when you put it on the blockchain, you can put it on a private chain, you can put it on a public chain, but that chain becomes either auditable for a private chain by the group that does the auditing for the private chain, or a public chain by anybody. And you can see that the actual transactions are happening. And like I said, a lot of what I did was in the game industry. It's my hobby. It's never been my job. But you would go out and you'd buy something, and there's this game from the 1970s called Fireball Island. The board's worth about $250. You wouldn't believe how many times I go to yard sales or swap meets or something like that and see a reproduction of it for sale, and they're acting like it's an original, and a person that doesn't know just goes and buys it. The blockchain and tokenization gives us the ability to take away that scamminess of the economic forum. And when you buy a token that represents 6 ounces of gold, you know that token represents 6 ounces of gold and can confirm it against the blockchain. You can't counterfeit something from a block that's permanent. And that gives us this ability to transfer wealth around the world, transfer ownership around the world, transfer land around the world, and give a voice to people that might not have access to that. And that's really why I got involved with tokenization.
There's a lot of reports around different blockchains. I mean, a lot of them in public that have either had hacks or scandals. Obviously, FTX is the big one. but the FTX weren't recording anything in any, apart from maybe a basic spreadsheet. So they weren't doing things transparently, or certainly controlled wise. But how do you square that circle with the problems that you see in the headlines in the industry?
So when I was writing the book, I came across hundreds and hundreds of like the scams, the pump and dumps, the things that like you're like, wow, is this a real industry or is this a problem? But then if you go look at pharmaceuticals, if you go look at any other industry, all those problems are there. The media just doesn't cover them because they're not sexy right now.
Yeah.
And I started digging into them. I started like doing a little bit of from the investigative reporting end of it. And one of the things that you start to notice is if a blockchain is hacked, there are two reasons. The first reason is there's human error. And that has been the number one problem with Web 1. That was the number one problem with Web 2. And that's the number one problem that's going with Web 3. No matter how much we improve our technology, if you give someone your password or if you give someone your seed phrase, you were not hacked, you were scammed. And people are calling it being hacked, but they weren't hacked. You did a social engineering attack and you had somebody steal off of you. That's the proper terminology. It's not a hack. So that eliminates one group. The second group is when you have companies that aren't really blockchains putting themselves out as blockchain companies. And that's why auditing and assessments like the BMM are so important, because there are a lot of snake oil salesmen out there on the market right now that are just throwing things up and saying, hey, this is the newest blockchain solution. And it may have code that's on a blockchain, but everything it does is off chain. All it does is have a record. And those things can still be, because they're built off of Web 2, or even some of them are throwbacks to Web 1, they can be hacked. Like, it's really hard to hack a blockchain. I mean, I'm not one of those guys that's going to say it's impossible. Quantum computing is going to change things, but it's really difficult. And I have not seen one legitimate hack of a blockchain. I've seen a lot of scams. I've seen a lot of social engineering. I've seen a lot of hacker methodologies, but nobody's gone in and brute force hacked the code. They go hack the person. And that's really, with all these things that are out there and all this bad record keeping, and FTX was it was a bunch of kids that had a really good idea and got the money and did not know what to do with the idea. And I don't think any of them planning on being evil, but they hurt a lot of people. And it's kind of like giving that kid that M80, and the first thing they do is they go drop it in a toilet or throw it in a post office box. They're not trying to destroy something, but they do. And that's what the kids had. They had fireworks. So
Sure.
I think there is a solution, and it comes with the adults coming into the room.
Okay. If I'm looking at the world, and this is if I look at the traditional finance world, they've got all the assets, they've got all the, infrastructures, they've got some sophistication, but they're struggling from a regulated or fiduciary perspective to get involved with this technology. There's certain coins. I mean, technically, you've got a Bitcoin ETF, you've got long exposure to Bitcoin or Ether in the regulated world. There's more openness, I guess, trying to set up banking or market solutions, but they've not gone past sort of like fund issuance or very high latency, low volume, use cases. And then if you look at the crypto DeFi world, there's a lot of innovation. And while they may be trading in the millions or billions, it's really a small amount of money compared to the global financial systems. So there's still a chasm. The traditional finance can't seem to get the technology right for its scale and size or regulatory requirements, and the DeFi crypto worlds can't break free into what are all these regulated assets. Where do you see that in the world?
Well, one of the big areas with that is making sure that we can meet the regulations. I know that with the double entry accounting that you guys do on your chain, it gives an avenue for TradFi to move more into the DeFi realm. And a lot of it is getting that message out there so that people understand, hey, I can follow the double entry accounting rules and still be in the DeFi world. You just have to do it via a private chain with a access. And as far as I know, you guys are the only ones that are doing that out there properly that people can access. And you need to have friends on the DeFi side that are willing to put tokens into the airlocks and stuff. And that is a big move. Now, this is something that is going to be forced on the CentFi or there is on the TradFi industry, because I just looked this up before a call this morning. Right now, the market cap of the cryptocurrency market is sitting right at about $2.5 trillion, which means in the last 3 days, it's surpassed Russia's GDP. So it is now ranked number 7 in the world if you treated our market cap as a GDP. And that is because of the decentralized nature of it. And the traditional finance world cannot do that, because in order to do that, you have to give up some of your control. And there's so much of the industry that's built around telling people how to invest their money, telling people what to do with their money. And I really think that as they embrace DeFi, it's going to make the TradFi world better, but it's also going to change the TradFi world into something new.
Yeah.
And it's scary for a lot of people, because right now we're saying, okay, we have the devil we know. Can we deal with what the next generation is? And if we don't at least look behind the curtain, we could be in trouble.
Yeah, we couldn't imagine the social media, Airbnb, Amazon prior to the internet. So if you were to put your, I'll ask you a two-sided question here. What do you see as potential possibilities with a distributed ledger adoption across the world, and just in terms of how does your model law that you mentioned sort of help facilitate that?
Well, one of the things that is scariest for business is not having regulatory clarity. And I don't want to get too far off reservation here on discussing governance, but the fact that the SEC has been barcoding cryptocurrency for the last year and a half, every time Bitcoin starts to run, they file a lawsuit against a major company, and then the courts smack that lawsuit down and tell them it's a frivolous case. That's a problem, because that's a government putting its thumb on the scale, and it's my government. And I've talked to my congressman and said, hey, they need to stop doing this. I put a book out and sent it to Gary Gensler's office about why they need to stop doing this, because it's disrupting the business. And that is really where I think this is starting to go. And it's a scary situation that the government, they want it to happen, but they want it to be their vision. And with our model law, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we want to provide you as a nation, regardless of what nation brings it forth, the ability to start from a point that other nations are starting from, but still keep your sovereignty and still keep your ability to change it if you want to. And realistically, I think that is a great mediated agreement between the governments that are like, we want to control, we want to say what our people are, we want to give our people the voice, we don't want to be told what to do, and businesses that say, hey, we need to know how this works. Around the world, we need to have a chance with this. And I think really that's what the model law does, is it gives governments a chance.
Although it's I think a ways away, the concept of Web3 through blockchain and distributed ledger technology is to push out the control to the users. And certainly, my vision is the internet protocol, you had restrictive communications. In other words, prior to the internet, you would have to go through a telephone exchange. Even, you had to go to a central authority to connect you with different people. The idea that you would have many-to-many connections without, thousands of miles of wire everywhere. But the internet protocol said, I want to communicate. I start here and it ends with you. So I just need to connect that communication. And you could only send an email inside your own company in the early 90s. Once the internet came along, you could send an email anywhere in the world. Why? Because everybody was using the same protocol. So a potential is that the blockchain becomes a transaction protocol. And basically you say, who am I transacting with? Where do I begin? Where do I end? And the rest of it is taken care of in terms of automatic. But pushing that out to the edge and the users is that where, again, I think you're hinting at this, but that's where you see a conflict between government control or regulation. You know, as much as the web has given us freedom of information and communication to some extent, despite the control by big tech or government oversight, is that what is that the friction that you see?
It is. It's there are for international constitutional law, it's a really interesting thing because every country out there, except for like five in the Middle East, have a constitution that says we want people to have freedom. We want them to have their voice. This is their choice. They're picking their government, and they have these wonderful constitutions. And then you turn around and they have laws underneath the constitutions that do the exact opposite thing that the constitution says. They want to take away freedom. They want to restrict, and it's all for the concept of the public good. And it really goes back to what Descartes discussed about the social contracts, where every bit of security comes at the cost of freedom. And it's not really a friction, it's more of a balancing act between where we want to be. Because I'm a small government guy, but I am the first person out there to tell you that anarchy is a bad idea, abject libertarianism is a bad idea. You have to have some protections or else it becomes a tyranny of the strong. However, if you flip the script on that, I'm also against plutocracy. I'm against communism. I'm against controlled utilitarianisms that say, and those communism and plutocracy are opposite ends. I don't care which way people fall on that scale. If you have absolute control in either way, it's a bad thing. And then whenever you have that, you either have a tyranny of the elite or you have a tyranny of the loudest voice. And the blockchain, the great thing about it is we have millions and millions of users so that the cacophony of voices is so loud that it can drown out almost any major voice, except for maybe Elon Musk, because he has a very loud voice in the space. But it's really not, like I said, it's a balancing act. It is how much freedom are we willing to give up to make sure that we're not living in a world of scams and like strong arm robbery. On the other end, it's like how much freedom do we want to keep to make sure that we can live with the world that we created. And I think blockchain gives us that solution.
Can you see it as a way to I'm trying to think, this gets into the hypotheticals, but you know, as a means to facilitate the government, its own governance?
I think at some point it does become a governance of its own. And this is one of the conversations I love to have with like Eugene and some of the DAO guys, that abject DAOs are scary because they're pure democracies.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, oh, we're a democracy, we're a democracy, we're a democracy. There is not a country in the world right now that's a democracy. The United States is a republic. England is a constitutional monarchy with republic tendencies. Like Plato was very clear, democracy is one of the worst kinds of government, save except for maybe polity, whenever that's the tyranny of the intellectual. And there has to be some set of rules that can override the population, or at least give them time to calm down. Because there's the old saying, if one guy has a bike and there's 5 people in a democracy, you know, after the vote's over, the only guy that's not going to have a bike is that first guy that started with it. And it works the same way with money. And I do believe that the decentralization and the anonymity that you can have with that can give people voting rights that there are countries like North Korea, China, there's Russia that could never imagine having the freedom to vote the way that blockchain can give to them without them being attacked for their vote. Heck, even here in the United States anymore, it gets kind of that way. But it's one of those things that is going to have to be a measured approach. We cannot just jump from the different forms of government we have to a digital cryptocracy. If anybody wants to have a really good read that can put you to sleep any night, my dissertation was actually on quadrilectics, about the different levels of conflict that arise when governments change form. And we are going to see conflict in this because this is different from everything else out there.
Yeah.
And it's the slower we go, the lower that conflict threshold is going to be.
Yeah, it's interesting with the comparison to the internet because there was a bit of open door. Let's see what happens before we overregulate it. All right. So on a lighter topic, what are the fun things you see coming forward in the near future?
Digital gaming is going to expand to places in the world where, like, and this is a huge thing because I think it was Will Rogers that said that play is the work of children. And if you've traveled around the world and seen like some of the Aboriginal villages in Australia, or I haven't been to Africa, but seen some of the videos of like children that are 5 or 6 years old that have to work every day and can't go to school and can't play because they're they're having to feed their families. And the same can be in India. The same can be the same as in inner city United States, or some of the slums outside of London. Like anywhere in the world, this is a problem. But the other thing you see is these kids all have cell phones because governments are giving cell phones out like candy. The e-gaming can provide a safe gaming environment for children where they can lock people out, because there is a undesirable portion of the human population that preys on children, and that the blockchain creates a record and they can trace who's interfering with children enjoying themselves in these environments. And it's really a happy thing that like governments, if they want to stop it, can now go in and stop like predators in these e-gaming environments to protect children, and give children, even if it's only for a couple minutes or a couple hours a day, that play back so that they can be kids again. I think that's a really like that's one of the I know it's kind of a depressing story of why we need it, but it's one of the happy things that we can get back. Another big thing that I'm seeing is that it can give people, the unbanked and the underbanked, a little bit of a voice,
Sure,
and
sure.
give them a chance to manage outside the traditional finances. Because one of the great things about blockchain, like if you go to like if you want money, you go on Lending Tree, they put like 10 banks in there and they say, "Do you want to give this person money?" Well, no, their credit score is 550,000 because some university told them to take out $120,000 for loans. That's an interesting system. The credit score system's absolutely screwed up in the world, so it's a horrible thing. Don't
Mm.
follow the US model for that. But with the DeFi world, you can go to a decentralized loan system and say, "Hey, I need a loan for $50,000. Does anybody want to give me that loan and at what rate?" And you can do it all on the blockchain. So there's a formal auditable record, and it'll give some people that made a mistake when they were young a chance to build their industry, even if they can't build credit, and get them a chance to get back into the economic system. Whereas a traditional finance model won't allow that, because you made a mistake when you were young. You don't get to live in the good world now. You have to live in the world of not being able to have credit. DeFi takes that away because there's going to be somebody out there that's like, "I'll take a chance on this guy. He has a good idea." And I think that's another fun thing. So for the kids, it's safe gaming environment. For the adults, it's a safe working environment. And that brings us back along to Will Rogers saying that play is the work of children.
No, two opportunities I see are certainly in the emerging markets, because I think distributed ledgers are like, you didn't need copper wire phone instruction to go to mobile phones. In the same way, you don't need legacy market infrastructure to introduce distributed ledger finance. And then I see not just gaming, but the idea of the metaverse, because it's a self-contained economy, has the potential to show the real world how to transact with a decentralized way. So I agree with it. So I did promise everybody that this webinar would be different, and I haven't attended too many webinars where you quote Descartes in one part and Will Rogers in the other. So thank you for making this interesting, Chris. Because of time, it's 20 minutes, and I know there's probably, I've seen a couple of people raise their hands. So hopefully everybody enjoyed this conversation. I knew Chris always has some great insights, and again, it wasn't the direction that was completely extemporaneous. So we didn't know what we were going to say before, and but I think hopefully we've covered a lot of the areas. So I'll open it up now if anyone wants to ask a question of me or Chris, please do. Otherwise, I can ask Chris another.
I think Brett's got his hand up.
Okay.
So I have a question. It's very interesting dialogue. I'm looking forward to our call later on, Christopher. Have you had any study of the law of the flag or corporatism? Have you looked into those paradigms? And with that said, have you analyzed BRICS in that context?
I have looked into BRICS, and now I might be using a different philosophy on law of the flag. Could you explain how you're using that? Because the law of the flag I'm familiar with is the rules around the American flag of what you're like not letting it touch the ground or the water or anything like that. And I don't think that's what you're talking about. So could you clarify for me?
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about more of how money works and how that governments are essentially corporations, and so they operate in a different capacity, but they operate in the capacity of the flag being the law, and that's why in war sometimes a country will take a flag, and that is like a high level overview. But I think that the introduction and the adoption of BRICS speaks to the currency model being asset backed. And that's why I think stablecoin is probably something that is worth the while, and especially as a corporation to be able to issue those stable coins but then we also get into the conversation of political economy, which goes back to Rome, where you have even probably ancient Babylon, where you have this political economy that serves the poor. And those contexts, I think, have to do with with equity and all of these things and the abuse of political economy. But just as a hard break, I do want to say that I wrote a paper or a dissertation in the early 2000s, political economy in the informational city. And so it's always my treatment that the digital twin or the smart city would be the rollout of corporate, the corporate governance, and it's starting with telecommunications. I know that that's kind of a scratch on what the overview of what my thinking is, but that is something that I feel stablecoin is probably a better solution, having an asset-backed currency, but for the corporations. And then you also have governance that has an asset-backed company, which I perceive BRICS is being widely adopted. At the beginning of the year, you have the whole Middle East that is adopting BRICS, and you have conflict emerging from currency, whether it's just the fractal system, or if it's something that's based on timber or oil or those components. But again, I was curious as to how you perceived corporatism in the context of the Wealth of Nations, written by Adam Smith in the year 1776, and what you think all of these culminations are arriving to in our current environment with currency.
Okay, I do like, yeah, corporatism I can understand with the way that the governments work and are running as a business. I mean, we can look at how Washington DC model works, we can look at how the London model works. They both work as corporations. They're very unique cities in that way, that they function that way. Expanding that view to a country, you're starting to move. Corporatism is not analogous with plutocracy because there are definitely distinguishing factors. So I don't want to like throw it into that bucket, but they do have the same problem where the political economy can start to form around a cult of personality, and then you have a completely structured economy where who's above you and who's below you, which is problematic. Addressing BRICS. BRICS is a incredibly interesting like issue for me, because it could just be buy and be just as effective, because you have China's economy, which is having serious problems right now because of the population demographic and how their human rights issue with the one child policy has crippled their population stock. It's a rapidly aging population. And then Russia, which the kleptocracy is really starting to fall apart. And the last election is kind of a demonstration of that. And then on the other side of the coin, you have India and Brazil, which are the two rising semi-superpowers. Like they're not just a global power, they're bigger than that, but they're not a superpower yet. They're not up with Russia and the United States and China. And my personal interpretation of this, and I don't want to extend this to any of the organizations that I represent, is that you have two shooting stars. You have Brazil and you have India that are moving into the future rapidly. We're doing a lot, like Black Wallet's doing a lot of work with India. We're making inroads in Brazil right now. And you've got these two anchors attached to them of Russia and China that are saying, we're the world power. We're the ones that need to be saying what we're doing. We're the ones that you need to be listening to. And a lot of the Indians that I talk to, and I don't talk to as many Brazilians as I'd like to, but a lot of the Indians that I'm talking to, like when you get into a conversation with them, they walk the line for a while, and then they say, why should we listen to Russia? Russia is the past. India is the future. Now, they might be saying the same thing about the United States when they're talking to a non-American. I don't know. But even with China, they were almost at war with China a couple years ago. So I really think India and Brazil, like for BRICS, whether it's a workable model, India and Brazil, yes. China, Russia, no. Like it's the only thing that's holding the BRICS thing back right now is the R and the C. And it's really funny that those are the two letters from the Russia and the China, because they're trying to run these two rising economies remote control and trying to take over them. And Brazil and India are both resisting control from Russia and China. So it's a very interesting.
You also have to look at their resources too.
Yeah.
Russia has a lot of resources.
I think Paul wants another question here.
Yeah. No, there's an interesting, because difference between a stable coin that's backed by a fiat currency as opposed to a stable coin that's actually backed by a commodity. One becomes value based on the value of that commodity. But when we're talking about wrestling control, it's also a monetary unit that cannot be inflated or deflated by any government policy. So the other thing as well, just for history's sake, the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world, but it wasn't so long ago that it was the sterling, British sterling, and even prior to that, the French or Dutch or the Spanish, they all had time of being the reserve currencies of the world. So it's not, just a given that the US dollar would be, but things like these type of asset-backed stablecoins, are a threat to control, and also for the people that believe in monetary policy and intervention, it will have a drastic impact. Let's go on to another question, because we've still got 10 or 12 minutes. Has anyone else got a question? I saw a few hands raised earlier on. Has anyone who's got their hands raised? Yavra, you can please pick up. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I have actually a question that follows a comment of Andrea Antonopoulos. I don't know if you know this guy. It's kind of the Bitcoin Pope, kind of. He once said that the road to making Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies mainstream will be long, but this was 10 years ago, so we're kind of getting there. My question is, how much more time do you think it will take for countries beyond the BRICS and other major demographics in the world to contemplate and maybe implement cryptocurrencies or decentralized money as a mean of transaction, and maybe even as a mean of decentralized applications?
I have an answer for that, but I'll let Chris go first.
I was gonna say you go first. I think it's gonna start. It's a snowball. It's gonna start getting faster and faster as we go. I think the model law, if it's accepted, is going to take a long way towards that, because if you review the model law, there are elements about how countries can safely integrate the use of cryptocurrency into official payments, into the tax system, into these type of elements. And a lot of the problems that we're facing with acceptance of cryptocurrency is, one, a lot of politicians don't understand the difference between Bitcoin and altcoin, and between altcoin and tokens, and between tokens and NFTs, and what the hell are these monkey pictures that are going all over. Like, there's so much data here, and they need time to break it down. And the business world's not doing that. The business world is taking that data, breaking it down using supercomputers, getting it all done in a day, and they're ready for the next bit of information to use. So there's a huge gap between business and countries. And throughout history, there's always a leader and always a follower. It's either businesses leading, countries are following, or countries are leading, businesses following. And right now, we have got businesses that are in a rocket propelled drag racing car trying to be the lead in cryptocurrency and trying to make billions of dollars. And we've got countries which are a tricycle with training wheels on it that are trying to catch up. And we need to balance that out somewhere. And while the model law may not be the thing that turns a tricycle into a drag racer, it's enough to make the at least put a motor on that tricycle and at least get it running in the race.
Yeah.
Chris,
Right.
just FYI, I dropped a link in the chat to the model law post.
Okay. So, Yavra, my answer to the question is, Bitcoin, some people will say, oh, Bitcoin doesn't have any value because it doesn't have any utility or whatever. Well, it is a utility. It does have a payment, monetary transfer utility. The problem is, and it's true of Ethereum, it's just primarily being used as a centralized clearinghouse for recording data. But if you think about it, most people are buying Ether or Bitcoin as a speculative buy and hold bet. There's not as pervasive a means of the monetary transfer. And true of any of the public blockchains, and certainly even the private ones, the thing they're suffering from is that they're customized at the front end. They lack scale, they lack capacity, and they lack the functionality really to support what would be a global transaction mechanism. And if you think about it, all the blockchains are limited use cases because they're customized, limited scale, and everyone's talking about layer 2 interoperability or bridging. And it's just sort of, rather than addressing the real issue, which is the layer 1 protocols don't do what they need to do, they're trying to fix it through layer 2, which just adds other layers of processing and control and risk of hacking and other things. It's really inefficient. The real dynamic is to create a better layer 1 protocol, because you're limited to was it 3 transactions a second on Bitcoin. So as soon as that network exceeds that, you've got backlogs. Ethereum's in the same way, and they're trying to roll up. They've got additive capacity, but not true scalable capacity. So this is the challenge that we, and I'm just being a little bit self-serving here, but we've addressed with our distributed ledger in Tapestry X, which was to address the requirements of the global financial industry, which is real-time configurable processing with accounting that's highly scalable, that's high capacity, because that's the only way. And this is what I've found is the traditional finance is wary, like I said, the control aspect, which Chris has talked to, or just they're wary of how do they deal with this new technology. And on the crypto DeFi world, they tend to be purists and sort of saying, we don't want any institutions, we don't want a collaboration. There is a chasm between the two worlds. And I think the only way that it really gets resolved is, like I said, when it has the performance and functionality to actually meet the requirements. I think what Chris said, in the gaming, in the metaverse world, that becomes a digital economy to try these things out at scale, high capacity, because you're talking about many-to-many peer-to-peer transactions. The institutional world is going to be many-to-many B2B transactions, but without the like I said, without the scale, capacity, and functionality, it's just an interesting way to record state changes in a database, but not much else. You've said you just put in the Lightning Network. The problem with Lightning Network is that you have to build it up into groups, and to go from Lightning Network to Lightning Network is difficult, and this is the problem with Ecuador, even with their implementation of Bitcoin. So Lightning Network is saying, rather than fixing Bitcoin, I'm going to create something above it that will do the thing better. You don't want to introduce layers. You introduce process control and risk. Anyway, but I again, that's just my opinion here. So we've got probably one last question, and then it'll be a quick answer, and then we'll wrap up. But I hope everyone's enjoyed the conversation and the points that were raised, and thank you for your questions. But is there anyone else who wants to ask one last question before we wrap up?
I'll throw a quick comment. You can hear more about this at the GBA FOMOGL event, May 2nd and 3rd at 1777 F Street. Be there, please.
And both Chris and I will be there, so
we're looking forward to it. Another fun thing about the value thing you just mentioned, Paul, is that a lot of people focus on just the market valuation of cryptocurrencies because it is at its most basic level data-backed value. One of the big things about Bitcoin, and this is why Bitcoin is so interesting to me, is because it's about solving data puzzles to get the Bitcoin. So there's data being processed through the system. And if you were to go to a university and try to use a supercomputer to process a large chunk of data, you're paying somewhere between $10,000 and $100,000 an hour to use that computer. Whereas with Bitcoin, the cost of using that and all of the distributed ledger blockchains is so much lower that the transitional value has such a higher level. So when I'm doing an interview and somebody's like, well, cryptocurrency really doesn't have any value because it's not backed by a government, it's like, go out and look at what the price of big data is right now and tell me big data does not have a value.
Sure.
And that's what our world is based on, because there are two things the cryptocurrency world has learned how to monetize. One is data and one is stupidity. And as long as we're working towards the first, slowly the second is going to be pushed out of the market.
Sure,
and
sure.
I don't want to take a shot at any.
I said it has a utility. It's not there at global scale. And we have an answer if anyone's interested. Brian, you raised your hand. So someone called Brian raised their hand. If you want to ask a quick question before we shut down. Or is that Brian gone? All right. Okay. Well, I'm going to thank Gerard and the GBA for facilitating this for us, and I hope you enjoyed the seminar. We'll have another subject next month, and so look out for these events. As I said, they're open to the public, and if you're interested, join the GBA to see the working groups, and then especially the future of money governance and law. And then,
Paul, can I say one thing? I'm starting to plan out the next conference after the Future of Money Governance Law, which is called Blockchain and Infrastructure, Exploring AI and Quantum, right? Sorry.
And that's going to be when? What's going to be when?
That'll be in September.
Okay.
That'll be in September. So I'm going to put my email address in the chat. If anybody's got any thoughts or ideas on topics for that, please feel free to let me know. I want to try to get at least a high level outline of that conference done before the May event, so I can go ahead and let people know what's coming in September.
Okay, great. Lastly, I just want to thank Chris for taking the time to speak with us, and as always, our conversations are fantastic, and it's an interesting, I think I've just re-emphasized one point Chris made. There's a lot of conflict between different sides of the argument, or people taking very positional points of view, and it's really the key thing is to find the solutions and bridge the gaps and really help the people that Chris said, the unbanked, the gamers, people. Let's make this technology work for people. So thank you, everybody. Someone just asked.
Paul, one last thing. Somebody asked about the recording of this, and we didn't do a good job of the last one, but let's make sure we get with Jordan and get this recording and possibly the last one on our YouTube channel. And then if you want to put your YouTube channel on there as well, feel free to. But I put a link to the GBA YouTube channel, and we will get this up sometime this week, so it will be on that channel.
That's great. No, that was I was just about to say that myself. Thank you, everybody, and see you next month. And look out for the topics.
Thank you so much, Gerard. Can I get on your calendar maybe tomorrow morning?
Sure. I tell you what, let me do this. I'm going to drop my Calendly link in here, calendly.com/Gerard Deshay. All right.